Hi everyone, it's Andrea speaking again, and today we have got a super cool topic. I'm so excited for that. So as you might know it already, today's topic is bondage, discipline, sadomaso and fetishes. So super cool topic. So today I'm gonna go live with the one and only Christopher, whom I already had a live, I think back in September. So I cannot wait for him to share his experiences with all of us and his insights on this topic. But before I invite Christopher in, I just would like to give a brief introduction of this topic. So just mind you that this is a very broad topic, and obviously we are not able to cover all segments of it, but I just try to give now a few introduction for those of you who are not familiar or in depth. So let's get into that. So what is BDSM? BDSM is a specific type of kinky play involving activities like restraints, sensory stimulations, power dynamic, impact play, and fetishes. So it's important to point out that the foundation of BDSM always includes consent and safety. So things like servitude and pain are typically considered unpleasant activities to most people, but when these activities are carefully agreed and negotiated upon between adults with the intention of giving and evoking pleasure, so this is BDSM. Let's break down the acronym. So for those of you who are not familiar with, for example, I myself wasn't familiar with the full acronym. So BD, so the BDSM B and D stands for bondage and discipline. The D and the S, so the second and the third letter, stands for domination and submission. And the last two letters, so S and M, stands for sadism and masochism. So this is the breakdown of the word. So BDSM covers a wide variety of activities, relationship fetishes that fall within this category. So just like the word kink, BDSM is not sex. It doesn't have to be sexual at all. So people can decide to engage in BDSM and it doesn't have to lead to sex at all. It's also important to point out that the BDSM is not based on abuse and violence. So if you think that BDSM is about abuse and violence, so you're missing the whole point of it. It's a controlled practice with the thorough understanding of the person's limit, personal boundaries and desires. So there are a couple of BDSM acronyms that I want you guys to be also familiar. So there is the RACK, which is spelled out like RACK, which stands for Risk Awareness Consensual Kink. And there is CCC, which is safe, sane and consensual. The common conception of BDSM is the power structure and pain, but people decide to engage also for example in different kind of role playing. So I would like to point out a few role playing without going further in details. So role playing could be the dominance and submissive, so also known as dom and sub, or master and slave. There is also the master and slave. There is also the bottom and top. The only difference is that it doesn't involve power exchange and power dynamic. And there is the sadist and the masochist. So just wanted to give you guys a little bit of introduction. And I think now I see that Christopher has arrived, who is definitely an expert in this topic, better than I do. So I'm just gonna invite him in. Give me a second. Mm-hmm. Hello.
Hello, let me turn my camera around here.
Yeah, take your time, no worries.
How's it going?
Hey Christopher, can you see me, hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Amazing. So as you might have watched it, like it's a very broad topic. So I was just trying to give like a little bit of introduction based
Hmm.
on the research I have made. I know that this is a super broad topic, so it's really difficult, just to yeah, describe it in like few sentences. So that's why I think that yes. So just let's get down to it, and whatever we are able to cover in this like 1 hour. And by the way, thank you so much for your time again.
Absolutely, you're welcome.
I see it's a sunny weather in Toronto. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's bright out, but it's a little chilly.
Hmm. I was actually thinking that when we had the last live, I think it was like first or second week of September. Do you remember?
Yep.
Yes, somewhere around. Yeah. So it's high time to continue. Okay. So my first question is that you remember we were like discussing about like what are your thoughts on the Birdwide sensation movie, The 50 Shades of Grey, as someone who is like actively practicing BDSM?
That movie, we tend to look down on it a little bit because the BDSM depiction of it is considered to be very unrealistic and borderline abusive in the way that it's applied. I get the fantasy of it. I think the fantasy is a very common one that goes along many different people's lines, but the movie is primarily fantasy. There's a lot of things that don't happen that could potentially lead a lot of that movie to just straight up rape. And the way that the relationship is depicted, as I've been told, because I've never seen the movie or read the book, but as it's been relayed to me, the way it's depicted and the way it forms, very little negotiation, very little attempt for the edges of the type of play that people can do, and it's generally considered to be overall damaging to the concept of BDSM as opposed to um, being better for it. Another movie that a lot of people will relate to is Secretary. Secretary is like the pre 50 Shades of Grey. It's a very similar dynamic of a powerful man and a sort of soft, diminutive woman. But the way that relationship plays out is a lot more realistic and a lot more believable. It is still a fantasy, but the way BDSM is applied in that movie is considered to be a lot more healthy.
Yeah, and hear you. And like many people say that, like basically, what makes this whole movie, worldwide sensation, just because like the luxury and basically like the luxurious lifestyles, right? So I heard this joke that if Christian Grey would have been like an average person or even like a homeless, or okay, not
Mhm.
homeless, but like a poor person, like nobody would care if he's into
No,
into
that's true.
kinkiness or BDSM or not. So there has to be this whole coverage with the luxurious lifestyle, with the private helicopter, private
Mhm.
jets, right? So it's like a whole
Well, it
package, I
doesn't
would say.
it doesn't always play out that way because if you look at what 50 Shades of Grey is, it's like a pop version of the romance novel. So like the drugstore romance books, they've got like the muscular, powerful man on the front, and then the submissive, feminine woman who's like under his spell. That plays out in a lot of different roles. It's not just a powerful millionaire. It can be a biker boss. It can be the leader of a gang. It can be a pirate. Often it's a bad boy, and bad boys can often be poor because they've chosen to operate outside of the system. And so in those situations, their power doesn't come from their money, it comes from their sheer will or their sheer sense of self. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily about the money. I'd say the money in 50 Shades of Grey, the luxury and all that, is more symbolic of this perceived power of Christian Grey. But really, it's about the power.
I see, yeah, yeah. So yeah, because like the end of the day, that um money is all about like having resources, right? And the more resources you have, like the more things you are able to control. Not
Exactly.
necessarily just like people, but you just simply have got more resources. Amazing. And I know you told me you haven't watched the movie, but like, do you think that like those people who are like actively involved in BDSM, they kind of mocking the movie. So basically just like touching the surface of it, because obviously it's a movie, so they were not able to bring out this whole, like the whole repertoire of the activities and relationships.
Well, I think another part of it wasn't just that it was a surface level exploration without a lot of nuance and detail to it. I think a lot of what people reacted to was this flood of what they would call normies coming into their community. Because after 50 Shades of Grey, the hub of kink, for better or for worse, at least right now, is FetLife. If you want to be actively involved with a lot of other kinky people, you're on FetLife or you're maybe on Reddit in certain places, but there really is no other centralized section of kinky people. And so when 50 Shades of Grey came out, all of a sudden the user base of FetLife and a couple other smaller forums just exploded with a whole bunch of newbies who didn't know what the hell they were doing. A lot of men who were looking to live out a fantasy they didn't know that women were into. A lot of women who were completely oblivious to some of the ways that this play can be dangerous. And for a couple of years, that really made the community really reactive to the whole movie. I think a lot of it was like, get out of our garden. You know, this is art space. But I just generally know that it's considered to be a very poor representation of what people would call kink.
Yeah, I hear you. And like my intake on that, you know, like basically like whenever there's a famous movie, you know, like Star Wars, there's like a whole franchise behind of it, right? So I can like candidly say that whenever I visited like sex shops, so you know, there's like certain like sex toy which has got the brand like, you know, 50 Shades of Grey. So I feel like, you know, with the Star Wars there are like toys, but like, you know, this is the adult version of it. So there's basically like a whole, like the movie was able to bring like a whole franchise with that. And also, as you said that, so I think that this movie just gave validation to a lot of people, right? So those people who were like entertaining the thought, but they kind of thought that this is, you know, not considered like a mainstream thing. So this movie just, I would say that give permission to people, you know, not to hide it, but just to really like live out this part of fantasy, as you say it. Okay, so I don't know if you have like watched the whole introduction. So basically, I have got my own introduction in words of BDSM. But according to you, Christopher, like how would you? What's your definition of BDSM? How would you describe it to anyone?
Well, you got the acronym down: bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism. Some people would also switch the S for submission. So bondage, domination, submission, and masochism. And that's a broad-ranging description, but my preferred way to explain what it is in a very simple, easy to understand way is it's an advanced form of foreplay. Either foreplay that leads to sex or foreplay that doesn't lead to sex. As you were saying, many people choose to practice BDSM without sex. Many people choose to practice BDSM with sex. And it's interesting, you'll actually find that some people think, the people who practice BDSM without sex will often think that people who practice BDSM with sex are doing it wrong and vice versa. It's pretty funny. But generally, it's a highly advanced form of foreplay that allows people to connect in ways that go beyond the typical types of foreplay people would think of. You know, you get people who act out full roles. You get people who create elaborate setups, elaborate, almost ritualistic kind of situations where you go through 10 to 50 different steps of things you would do. Some people do it organically and they play a kind of as things come to them, whereas other people will create an entire scene. It's often called a scene. And that things have to hit a beat in a certain time in a certain way, and they love like setting it up so it plays out that way. But at the end of the day, it's really just an advanced way to connect with another person, which is what the main point of foreplay is.
Yes, I remember like even with the live we did previously, you already mentioned this one. And somebody was asking that like BDSM is not sex. So basically we just like spoke about it and covered that like BDSM can lead to sex, but it doesn't have to be like necessary sexual, because like with the changing of the roles, so and with the power dynamic, it's more like I would say that giving space to another person and It's good that this topic has been brought up because I'm sure you are familiar with the acronym or term. So, dumb space. So, how would you describe dumb space, or what is the meaning of it?
More common, the term is subspace, but I believe both exist.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start with subspace because that's the much,
Yes,
much
please.
more common term. Subspace is when you're in a scene, when one person is in a scene and through play or through the intellectual exchange, the emotional exchange, or the power dynamic, they enter a state that's almost like a form of hypnosis or a form of meditation where they become completely subservient to the person they're playing with. Now, this isn't a permanent state. It's not like you're locked into this. It's more like if you ever go on roller coasters?
Yes, of
Yeah.
course, of
So
course.
you know
Yeah.
when you're at the top of the roller coaster. As you're going over, are you gonna have more fun if you're fighting the roller coaster, or are you gonna have more fun if you let the roller coaster take you where it's going?
The
You're
second,
gonna have
yes.
you're gonna have more fun if you surrender to it. That's I essentially the concept of what subspace is. It's a complete surrender to the experience. And I've been told by people when they're in subspace that anybody could come up and tell them to do or say or do anything to them, and they would just go with it. They wouldn't even question it. So in a way, you can kind of think of it like a type of trance. And I think Dom space is a sort of opposite to that. It's a different type of trance, but it's a supreme state of self-assuredness. Complete self-assured knowledge that the person has control over the situation, they know what they're doing, they're competent, and there's no judgment, there's no second guessing their decisions.
Yeah, I think, yeah, thank you so much for describing. The way how I understood dumb space is that basically it's just a heightened or intense like focus on that person, right? So whenever basically like what is the dominant doing is like basically giving all the attention, similar way like sex, but like you literally give like all your focus and attention because you want to understand your sub like personal boundaries, you know, the limitation, like how much pleasure she or he can take. Yeah, I would say that's pretty interesting. And like I'm not sure if you heard that, like I was like mentioning this different kind of like changing rules. Like, do you know something about them or do you practice any of them? So basically I mentioned three. I mentioned dominant and submissive, also known as like master and slave. I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned the top and the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So on the top and bottom, and there is the sadist and the masochist. So what are your thoughts on all of this?
They refer excuse me, they refer to the roles as played certain ways. So master slave implies almost a character being played. The master has complete control over the slave within negotiated limits. The master is sort of acting in a headspace or a role, or in some people, I would say some people even do it completely, like that is their life. They fall into that. But the master is essentially the boss. They decide the direction of the play. They decide the slave's day-to-day life in some cases, or they decide what the slave does in play. Um, the slave is straight up a slave. They have no decision-making power. They don't influence the situation. They might offer advice, they might offer suggestions, but the master at the end of the day is making the decision. Top and bottom is often applied strictly to a play scene. So when two people are playing, say if one person is being spanked or flogged or whipped, that person is the bottom, and the person doing the spanking and the whipping and whatnot is the top. And then, was it sadist and masochist? That was the other one you were
Yes,
curious about?
yes.
That's a little more simple. Sadism refers to the gaining of pleasure by inflicting pain or inflicting suffering or something like that. And masochism is the term for people who gain pleasure from receiving pain or suffering. So like somebody who gets quite turned on when they're spanked or whipped or maybe like pinched or whatnot, that would be a masochist. Somebody who gets turned on by doing that is a sadist.
Yeah, thank you so much for describing, because for example, I was familiar with the sadism and masochism and the dominance and the submissive, but I had no idea what means like top and bottom. For example, like as I pointed out, the main difference between like submissive and dominant versus the top and bottom is that the second one, it's not about power dynamic, or it's like not as strongly about power dynamic than the first one. Cool, cool. And would you say that like changing roles or role playing, does it like always has to like involve dressing up? So like, you know, putting different costume on? Mm-hmm.
No, not at all. I don't dress up. Um, no, for at least for me personally, it's very much all going on in here. Um, but I think a lot of people do enjoy the dressing up. I see some people, they like if they're a master, they'll often wear very masculine, very powerful suits, or if they're more into leather, they'll wear clothing that kind of asserts a sort of control. Whereas if they're into leather and they're submissive, the clothing will often be very exposing, very obviously very sexual, but very, it makes the person vulnerable. They're more like likely to be acted upon when they're wearing clothing like that. I'm not trying to imply that this is within negotiated consensual relationships, I mean, if that makes sense. But I don't think some people dress up, they enjoy it. I think you'll find a lot of crossover with the cosplay crowd or people who enjoy performance art, whatnot, with people who dress up. But in my experience, it's about maybe 50% of people will actually really get into that aspect of it.
Yes, amazing. And I know you told me, Christopher, you haven't watched the movie, but basically it's the same scenario, right? So Christian Grey is most of the time like fully dressed up, like, you know, wearing the tuxedo or whatever. And the woman Anastasia, like I would say 75% of the time she's like completely naked, right? So it's always like the woman at the end of the day who is like, as you said, more vulnerable or like more exposed. I see. And so my next question is that like it's good that you mentioned, I think you mentioned leather, because like, you know, the title of this like live is BDSM and fetishes. And I haven't like gone too much details into fetishes because just simply like I didn't want to take too much time with the introduction. But the way how I understand that, like basically fetish, you have a special type of attraction or like obsession to certain object and experiences. And so many people mistake that, so they think that they have fetishes. Like for example, for women it's common when they say, oh, I have got a shoe fetish, or like men say that, oh, I have got a breast or like ass fetish. But like fetish really means that you need this certain object, or you really need this certain experience, so that basically you get off, or so otherwise you're not gonna reach the climax. So most people think they have it, but in reality they do not have it. So what are your thoughts on fetishes? How would you describe the word?
I think you've done a very accurate way of describing it, and I would agree that it is misused. It might also, the definition of it might also be changing culturally, but generally, a better way to think of a fetish is to look at a foot fetish. When a woman says she has a shoe fetish, it means she really likes buying shoes. That's what she's really saying. If you have a true foot fetish,
Compulsory buying. I said compulsory buying.
exactly, right? But if you have a true shoe fetish, or much more commonly a foot fetish, you cannot get off without those being in the room or in play. So a person with a foot fetish will get off, literally find pleasure and get off in worshiping feet, in washing feet, in kissing feet, sucking toes, rubbing feet, like just being around feet. Their whole sexual identity can often revolve around that. I've seen more common in the gay community, but I've seen like beard fetishes. I've seen And then there's like another less common but very interesting one is a leather or latex fetish. And people like that, they don't just love it, but they actually derive pleasure from wearing or having others wear latex and leather for them because of the way it sits on the skin, because of the texture it brings, or the colors and the shine it can add to the body. You'll get rubber fetishes. You'll get people who have a fetish for. I mean, I've seen people who have like they get off by having hornets sting them. You know, one guy. This one I never met him, but I heard about him. You ever know what stinging nettle is?
I'm sorry?
Do you know what stinging nettle is?
No, I do not.
So here in Canada and probably the U.S., there's a plant that grows called stinging nettle. It's covered in very, very tiny spines with venom in them. And if you grab it, it'll like burn your hand. You'll get welts. And this guy, he enjoyed that sensation so much that he would keep extra stinging nettle on hand just so he could be beaten on the back with it. So he had I had a fetish for a very specific type of pain. If it had been less specific, if it was just pain, you might not call it a fetish, but it was a specific type of pain, so that kind of needles it down into fetish territory.
Wow. So thank you so much for describing like all of this. I'm sure like we've got a better understanding. And when you mentioned the latex and for example, a leather, so does that mean that, for example, those people who have got like latex fetish, so unless their partner is wearing like latex, they are just not able to reach the climax, like if it's, let's say, like a conventional sexual activity?
I don't know if they wouldn't be able to reach climax, because I think everybody does that individually differently. But I think that's, as a broad description, it could be applied that way. I think it's just like if they're having sex, they're having much, much better, more fulfilled sex if their fetishes are involved. If they're not involved, you may still have great sex. Might just be that, you know, it's kind of like you'd rather be eating Rocky Road ice cream, but you're eating vanilla.
I hear you. Yeah, so it's just the whole experience is like more heightened, or like, yeah, you just reach the climax, let's say, stronger. Yeah. Cool topic. So Christopher, would you like to tell us please about the Fat Life? Like you did mention it a couple of times, but those people who aren't familiar, so what's Fat Life?
Fat Life is the primary social network for kinky people. Some people call it the Facebook of kink. Some people call it like, you know, the Reddit of kink. It's generally considered to be a social network. Some people think it shouldn't be used for dating. I personally find that it's an excellent way to date because of the way it works. There's no algorithms involved in the way you see profiles, but you can't search by age or location. So you can search for male and female, you can't search by gender or location. So you can search for people of certain ages. You can search. No, sorry. I'm sorry. You can't search by gender or age. That's what you can't search for. So you can search for people in Toronto, but you're going to get everybody in Toronto. You can search for people in, you know, Mississauga, but you'll get everybody in Mississauga. And what's very powerful at is bringing like-minded people together to form discussion groups, posting pictures that are a safe place to post kinky pictures that show nudity or sex, and it's really good for running events because of the way it brings people together and the way events are shared. It's very easy for people all over the entire network to see an event anywhere in the world, which is kind of cool. Like if I'm running an event in Toronto and one of my friends says they're going to it, all of their friends will get a notification about that event on their feeds. So they'll be like, this person is going to this event. So a person in Australia, just because they're friends with one of my friends, will see that I'm running an event in Toronto, which I think is a really cool thing. It's like, it allows people who would never hear about certain events to hear about them, and then if they happen to be in a certain place, they can actually attend them.
Christopher, when you say event, like, are you referring like a private event or like this type of like a BDSM event or?
Oh, any event really. Like if it's a month, I can talk about these terms like a munch, a meet and greet, a play party, a private play party. I run beach parties that are sort of like a munch slash a mini play party, but because I don't like munches. Um, yeah, and it allows people to effectively connect in a very efficient way. Some people don't like the way it runs. They think it's too low security, or it allows people who shouldn't be on the platform to be on. But from what I've seen, FetLife does its best to keep dangerous people off the platform, while making the platform as open and free as possible. In a way, it's one of the more open and free platforms because they don't restrict you in the way you can move about it, in the way other platforms do.
Mm-hmm. And you did also mention like posting pictures, and like when you mentioned posting pictures, are you referring to the members they are allowed to post like I don't know, their body parts or like sexual type of picture? Is that what you meant?
You can post full-on pornography if you want to. A lot of people will make their own pornography. A lot of OnlyFans models or e-girls will advertise like their content websites that way. They'll post like teasers or whatnot, and they'll get lots of followers on FetLife, which then turns into followers on OnlyFans or other apps like that. But generally, yeah, pretty much anything is allowed as long as it's between consenting adults. They used to allow things like blood play and whatnot, but a couple of credit card companies got annoyed with them for doing that, so they cut that down. But generally, you can find some pretty crazy pictures on there if you're willing to explore for long enough. I've seen some pretty shocking things.
Oh my god. So would you say that like you have to get verified, like to kind of like verify people, or does it require
You
the...
can be verified, like my profile's verified, but it's not necessary. What's much more necessary is that the person you are in real life lines up with the person you are on FetLife. So if you're going to events and the person, say you have you depict yourself one way on FetLife, but you act and depict yourself a different way in the real world, sort of like any online dating system, it's going to lead people to be very distrustful of you. But generally the idea is just be authentic to who you are. You don't have to share your face. You don't have to like show everybody who you are. A lot of people never show their face on the website. They just take body shots, or they cut it off the nose or something like that. A lot of people never post nudes. They just post regular photos because they don't want that on the internet. But it's generally like if you don't need to be verified if you're going out to events and parties and you're a safe player, because the word will get around about you regardless. And verification on FetLife really just tells to other people that you're not a bot. That's really the whole purpose of it.
Yes, thank you so much for explaining. And would you say that like are there advantages of basically anyone who would like to register to this FetLife? So what are the advantages of it?
It'll help you find events in your area where you can meet people who are into the same thing as you are. So if you're interested in meeting people to play with or people to talk to or just making friends to have it, if you want kinky roommates, things like that, then you can use FetLife to find that. If you're interested in dating, I don't see any issue with politely messaging people as long as you're not a dick about it. You know, send one message, don't send more than one if they don't reply. And let it go. If you want to post pictures of yourself, if you have exhibitionist tendencies and you want to show off pictures to people who will appreciate them, FetLife can be a way to do that as well. A lot of people just go on there for bantering or joking around, typical social media stuff, but with people who kind of understand their sense of humor or their life experience, because everybody on the website has a thing in common, whereas on Facebook, it's just everybody on Facebook, and they sort of they form into their own groups, their subgroups, because there's just too many people on there without a shared interest for the whole network to have a single identity. But a lot of people on FetLife can all connect based on one thing, and that's they're into BDSM or kink and fetish.
Yeah, so it's essentially a safe place, like a safe community for those people who are interested in kinkiness. I see that, yes. And did you meet your current girlfriend on this Fat Life?
Yeah, she messaged me on it.
So that's a good example, like, how it turns into something long lasting.
Mhm.
Cool, cool,
I,
cool.
I think 2 or 3 of my partners have, because I've been on FetLife since 2008. I'd say 2 or 3 of my partners I met through FetLife.
Yeah, because as you said, like, how people usually meet, they meet through, like, having a common interest, right? Like,
Hmm.
those people who are going to the same, like, gym or, going to the same classes, of course, like, they already
Exactly.
share, like, common interests. So I would say that, it doesn't have to be like this type. So when we are talking about, like BDSM, but it can be, like this is one form of interest, right? So like-minded, like attracts like. So I would say that this definitely implies like this area of life. So for me, it was also now I'm actually gonna be referring back to this whole like BDSM like in general topic. So when I did my research yesterday, for me it was also interesting to find it out that like BDSM doesn't have to be in person, right? So it can be throughout the phone or it can be
Hmm.
virtual
Hmm.
because then one person is giving orders and the other person is kind of like submitting to it or like
Hmm.
following orders. So it doesn't have to be in person.
No, not at all. Oh, you'll see a lot of that where people are doing long distance relationships and say like they'll the top or the master or the dominant daddy, whatever you want to call them, will will create routines or tasks for their submissive to do, and then the submissive either has to send them photos of them doing it or they have to check off a checklist. There's even an app now where a dominant can assign tasks to their submissive, and the submissive is like supposed to check the app now every day. I think it's, I forget the name of it, but I'll see if I can find it for you.
Yeah,
I
can you
played
please
around.
send it to me?
Yeah, for sure. I played around with it a little bit, but it wasn't as fun as like just texting things. Like texting things is quite simple and it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and yes, thank you so much for like describing all of this. And like one thing that I also find interesting when I did my research is that so basically when we are talking about this dynamic power dynamic between a dominant and a submissive, like people think that the dominant is the one with power, right? Like he or
Mhm.
she is the one with power, but in reality they are both sharing the same power because the sub is basically deciding to submit according to his or her own will, right? So
Mhm.
like that makes it like shares the same power. I just find it pretty interesting because I always thought that the one who is like controlling is the one who has the power.
Mhm. I would say it's like willful surrender. So like you
Mm-hmm.
will yourself to surrender to another person, and trust them to hold you in safety and respect while you do that. A lot of people would say the sub has the true power because the sub can say stop at any time, either using a safe word or, and I mean, I think there's some truth to that, but the reality is both partners can say stop at any time. And so
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that your description is more accurate. It's a shared power. It's a
Mm-hmm.
shared power dynamic in an individual situation.
Mm-hmm. So there is this like terms the yellow and the red, right? Which is like referring to soft and hard limits, right? So when you're violating or like the person is reaching their personal boundaries, so there are these safe words that can be used, the yellow and the red, but it could be like any words as I understood.
It can be any words. The most common are red, green, and yellow. So green is pretty straightforward. Like green is go. You can do whatever you kind of want to do within our negotiated boundaries. Yellow, I've seen yellow used a couple different ways. Yellow might mean check in. Yellow might mean change it up. Yellow might mean slow down. So
Mm-hmm.
that's definitely something you need to negotiate with your partner to make sure you get a decent understanding of what they're saying when they're saying it. And then red means stop immediately. So red isn't always just about like approaching a soft limit or a limit. It is about definitely approaching a limit. It also might just mean like I need a break. So like I need to be when they call red, they're like I need a break, get up, take 10 minutes, do something else, and then maybe they start to feel green again. They can say green. Um,
Mm-hmm.
It tends to be a very simple and effective way of doing it. I rarely use other safe words just because red, yellow, and green are so obvious and simple that I don't see the point in complicating it. Some people want to use other safe words that are like more complicated because they're at a point where even using red, green, and yellow is too, they feel too powerful with them. So they want to have a word that they'd almost never use. So I knew one person who wanted their word to be like Slipknot, the band, or another person wanted to be Gorgoroth, which was pretty funny. But they wanted to use a word they'd almost never use, so that while they were playing, they didn't feel like they had too much power. They didn't want to feel like they had a lot of power. They wanted to lose that feeling, even if only temporarily.
Hmm. Yeah, so almost like, like kind of like a last resort, right, to use this word because it's just so complicated and like, yeah, so like not a common word. I get that. And I'm just wondering that because this is something that I was also thinking about yesterday that, when you think about dominant and submissive or dom and sub, so usually there's a picture of like a dominant man and like woman come, like a submissive woman come to our mind. But what are your thoughts on when the roles had changed? So meaning that, the woman is the one with the power, so she is the dominant, and the man becomes a sub, basically. What are
I
your
think that's,
thoughts on that?
I think that's fine. I think it kind of sucks for the male subs because there's not a lot of female dominance. And there's a ton of male subs out there. Like a lot of male subs are powerful men in their day-to-day life, and they use their submission as a way to kind of like take a break from that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why female dominance can make as much money as they do. Female dominance can just rake in the cash because there are so many guys out there that are looking for one. You're in a buyer's market, basically. But for the guys that do find a female dominant that's actually their partner, I find they're very, very happy, and the relationships usually go very well. They're just not a very common thing. But you can play it any which way. You can even stack layers on top of it. You could say be a dominant male, and you could order your submissive to flog you and call you names, if only to make her uncomfortable. Some people might call that topping from the bottom, right? And it's really, really varied, and I'm looking for a word here. There's a many different colors to how people play. It's infinite.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I understand that. And I think that, just like in many activities in life, so they say that, like, how to say this one. So, they encourage if you know one activity and you are a right-handed person, try to do the same activity like left hand so that, you just become a better player, whether
Hmm.
if it's like, volleyball or whatever. I would say that, you're gonna become essentially like a better dominant if you like,
Yeah.
try both
Hmm.
of. So if you are, I think it's called like fluid, right? So those who are able to basically like switch roles, so they can be
Generally here
like
they're
in
called
effect.
yeah. Generally here they're called switches. So a
Mm-hmm.
switch is
Switches,
somebody who
yeah,
likes playing
yeah.
both roles.
Actually, what comes to my mind or what came to my mind is that when you are doing social dances or let's say like Latin dances,
Hmm.
and like in order to be an effective like leader, because like this kind of like dancing, the man is like leading one. So the person becomes a better leader if they learn how to also if they learn how to do the other step or the other like a
Absolutely.
female. Yeah,
There's
that's.
actually an old saying that used to be applied to politics or to moving up in the world, and that's if you wish to lead, you must learn to follow. And
Mm-hmm.
personally, as somebody who's led and who's followed, the more I've followed before I've become a leader, the better I've done as a leader in that field because I understand the position of the people I'm leading. And the
Mm-hmm.
same plays true in kink. Like, I'm not a sub. I don't enjoy subbing, but I have bottomed for things I'm interested in doing to other people. So if I'm interested in being tied up, or sorry, if I'm interested in tying somebody else up, I'll ask somebody to tie me up once or twice so I know what it's like, so I know that what the feeling is like. If I'm interested in using a particular toy that I've never used before, I'll ask somebody to use it on me quickly so that I have an idea of what it feels like, what it can do, right? I'm not talking about like having a scene or anything. I'm like, a good example is somebody gave me a cane that was shaped like a katana, like a ninja sword. And it's a great cane, but I didn't want to hit anybody with it until I knew personally what it was capable of doing. So I had her like whack me on the backside 4 or 5 times, right? Um, but I don't enjoy that, but I do think I should know what the tools or toys that I'm using do, because I'm not a competent user if I don't. If I don't have at least an idea of what it's doing to somebody else.
Yes, I hear you. And yeah, I think that was like a beautiful description of not just like obviously not just into this like king community, but like, it can be applied like all spheres of life. Amazing, amazing. And yeah, so I think that our last question should be that so why do you think that like why do you think people or those people who are unfamiliar like they should try out or engage in any sort of like BDSM activities?
Well, I think everybody should try everything once. I mean, I think everybody should go skydiving at least once in their life, right? But I'd say like if you have fantasies in your head that involve power dynamics, if you're a little curious about what it might feel like to be blindfolded during sex, or if you find yourself imagining when you're fantasizing about playing with another person in some sort of position above or below them, then that's when I think investigating BDSM and seeing if your fantasies align with the different play styles and aspects of kink work. I think generally most people do experiment with BDSM to some degree. I think a lot of people will try a blindfold during sex once. A lot of people will try handcuffs or something once or twice to see if they like it. And then the people who start to repeat that behavior because they enjoy it eventually find kink just by a process of elimination.
Yeah, I would say that like, when people are like experimenting, they are trying with the softer items or softer toys, right? Like you said, like,
Mhm.
because blindfolding is not painful at all, right? So I don't think that people are like immediately start with floggers and, like
No,
all
no.
of this. So they would start with handcuff or of course, like what you see also the movies. And actually just a couple of like things also like came up to me before we finished the live. So I think that it was very interesting when basically you said that like about like masculine men, they are kind of like so like when you are a masculine man and you have got all these responsibilities, you have got all this deadline, you have got like all this like so you are under pressure all the time. I think that
Mhm.
that's why like there's a need or desire for masculine men to kind of become like stop, because I think that like everybody, like each one of us has got this psychological like need to let go of control sometimes and like to completely 100% to give up our power to someone we love or trust.
I think it's Jungian. I think it's all like masculine and feminine archetypes. Um, Jung said that the masculine and feminine is in both male and female. And so a guy who's in his masculine archetype all day long for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, he's leading the pack in order to balance himself out. And not all powerful men are like this. I think that's a myth, but some of them definitely need to balance that masculine side of themselves out by going into their feminine side. And the feminine, if the defining factor of masculinity is will, then the defining factor of femininity is surrender. And I would say that being willful for 60 hours a week has got to be exhausting. So I wouldn't be surprised if people who are in a willful masculine archetype for that long occasionally just need a time to surrender, even if they're embarrassed or shy about it. That's why a lot of them keep it secret. They don't want anybody to know. Um, and I suspect the same is you'll see it even more in powerful women. Powerful women, when like women with high paying jobs or very, very stressful jobs, are very frequently submissives in bed. That's a major experience I've noticed with women with a lot of power. Because like they don't feel like a woman during their job. They often feel a lot like a man. Or they have to
Mm-hmm.
play in a man's world, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But yeah, I think it's really just part of the reason it's exploded, BDSM and kink in general. And this is an interesting kind of way to top off the thoughts. Is a lot of the modern world doesn't like to acknowledge the masculine archetype and the feminine archetype. They kind of like to blend them all together and say you should be everything all the time, and you should hammer down this part of masculinity and hammer down this part of femininity and push it up. But with BDSM, you can take the masculine archetype and you can turn it up to 11 and just be in it. Just be completely masculine for a while, whether you're a man or a woman, doesn't matter. Or you can take the feminine archetype and just like live in it to completely become one with it. Be small, be diminutive, be soft, go with the flow. Do not fight the current, kind of the maelstrom that you're caught up in. And I think because the modern world doesn't really acknowledge the archetypes like they really need to be, I would think that's a major driving force of why BDSM seems to be becoming more and more popular, why it's hitting the mainstream more often. I think people are looking for a way to reassert those archetypes.
Yeah, I love that you bring out this whole like archetypes, because I would think that, like I had this like live around 2 weeks ago when with Alex I was talking about, he's also Canadian, that like the traditional like masculine and feminine roles, and basically he was saying that women have done a better job of empowering themselves than men, kind of like accessing their emotional needs. So I would say that BDSM is also helping couples to have got like, this healthy like female, feminine and masculine dynamics. So basically, like for a woman, as you said, that I love when you said that the will and the surrender. So I think that one is a very masculine quality and the other one is a very feminine quality, right? So amazing. And there's just only one last thing that I would like to, because I think it's important that we also discuss about it. So I didn't really mention that, but there are obviously some certain hormones emerges when people are like engaging in this type of activity. So when we were talking about this subspace and the dump space, so I think that it's important to point out there are certain kind of hormones, for example, the adrenaline, and I'm not sure which is and endorphin, the endorphin and the adrenaline, which is like compared to this like runner high, for example. Or so what are your thoughts on these hormone surges in terms
I would
of
say
BDSM?
that for dom space, it's definitely an adrenaline high. For subspace, it's probably in serotonin, and what's the other one? It's not oxy. I think it's oxytocin. I think it's called, but not oxycontin. Because sometimes they call it oxycontin.
Yeah, it's a love hormone.
Yeah, I would say that the love hormone, especially in subspace, because subspace involves a lot of worship, frequently involved like for example, one of my partners when she was in subspace, we were at a huge party with like 300 or 400 people and pounding music, and she said when I went into that headspace, it was like the only thing that existed in the entire world was you, pointing to me. Right? And it was like I couldn't see anybody party. I couldn't see anybody in the play area. I couldn't hear the music anymore. All I could perceive was you in front of me, like, for lack of a better term, like a god. That's how she described it. I'm not saying I am a god or anything like that, but the same sort of principles of worship can often apply in a subspace sort of situation.
Yeah, I would say that it's a pretty cool feeling or good feeling for any man or for any dominant, right? Like,
I would say I would say that to be able to have for a partner to go into subspace with you indicates that you are playing in a way that builds trust, that builds connection, and builds safety. You can't do it if you're not a safe player. If you don't make your partner feel safe, if she or he doesn't feel like, it's kind of like let's go back to the roller coaster analogy. You're going over the tip of the roller coaster and your harness falls off. Are you going to feel safe when that roller coaster goes down the road? So part of the dom's job or the dom's role is to make sure that the the submissive or slave or whatever feels like they have their harness on, feels like I'm safe on this ride. Because once you're safe in the ride, you can surrender to it.
Thank you so much, Christopher. So
Welcome.
we are right now about that. We are reaching now the 1 hour limit. Is there anything that you would like to still share or something that you think it might be useful?
How much time we got?
Up to you.
Okay. One thing that's really important when talking about kink is to touch on the importance of consent. I'm not a consent, what's the term, fanatic, but the thing that separates BDSM from sexual assault or rape is consent. And I'd argue that a good way to go about this sort of thing is not to overcomplicate things when it comes to consent, because you can easily do that. So I'm going to give a little plug for the concept of fuck yes. And fuck yes is, if you're not fuck yes about this, then you're no. So when I tell people, especially new people I'm playing with, you know, when we're talking about the things we're doing or the things we're negotiating or the fantasy she has or the fantasies I have that I'd like to act out on her, I said to her, if you hear all this and you're, maybe, or you're like, sure, or maybe you're like, well, I guess, that's not good enough for me. I want to hear, fuck yes, let's fucking do this. That's what I want to hear. If I don't get that, then I can't be sure that the person I'm doing this with is a safe player. I can't be sure that they're going to stay with me the entire time, or that they're not going to disassociate, things like that. And if your person disassociates, that can lead to bad things happening, to accidents or to misunderstandings. So make sure if you're playing with somebody else that when you're talking about the idea of playing, they're like, I'm fucking ready to do this. Let's do it, man. Because I think you're worth more than somebody being iffy about playing with you.
Yeah, I think that's you, as someone says that you got it right, and it's just amazingly said that. And I think that that's a great analogy and can be applied like in other spheres of life, right? So it's not a fuck yeah. If I can add from a woman point of view, I would say that, like, if we are talking about like on a broader term, I'd say that women, they tend to like be more pleaser than men, in a way that, you know, like women, they sometimes agree or consent to certain activities that, you know, it's not a fuck yeah, as you said, it's not a fuck yeah, hell yeah for them. More like that they just want to please their partner, right? Or they just want to give, like, basically, you know, this porn star image, like whatever they can give to their partner. Speaking from like a personal experience or even in a general term, I would say like anal is like considered one of them, right? Like it's not necessary, it's something that women, they want to do, or like they are 100% into that, but it's just more like, you know, they wanna basically like please the partner. But it could be also, you know, it depends on your, like, how to say, arousal level. It also depends of your mood. It also depends of how tired you are, right? So it can depends on many things.
Well, you can be, you may not like you don't have to be too rigid about it. You may not like maybe you don't love blowjobs, right? But you're fuck yes about pleasing your partner, and your partner loves blowjobs. So a lot of women I've experienced enjoy that kind of play. Like, I don't really like doing this, but I fucking love doing it for you. You know? I've had that experience a couple times.
But that's as I said, that for a man it's a very assuring feeling. And you know, when you were mentioning the trust issues, like the very first thing that came to my mind is the same with respect, right? So just like respect cannot be given, so it always has to be like earned. The same thing with trust, right? So you cannot make a person or the self or submissive, like, you know, trust in you. So it has to come from her like own free will.
Absolutely. You can't force somebody to trust you. You either act in a trustworthy way or you don't.
I see. And when you mentioned the word constant, like, you know, okay, right now, so if we are talking about kind of like in a business format, because it was the same with in the movie, like, does it have to involve like a physical contract or any kind of, or basically just the word of agreement between like two adults or
I think
negotiation?
it's a preference. It's also, I also argue like where you are in your personal development. If you're not good at negotiating agreements or remembering agreements, or if you have a tendency to like for things to slip your mind, then a written contract or a written agreement for both people to refer back to is really handy. Other people just really get off on protocol. They love like rigid structures that are almost like um, like punitive in a way. Like if you step out of the structure, you're in trouble. Some people just adore that kind of thing. They feel very safe in it. So if you're that kind of person, then a contract might be a really good idea. But there's no such thing as a legal binding BDSM contract. They don't exist, right? I can't write a contract with a woman and tell her she's my slave for 23 hours a day, and then go to the judge and say, "Sir, she said she would do this," you know. Um, but uh, but I think like it can either be a fun way to play. It can be a really a good tool for people who struggle with communication or negotiation. But if you're more developed, you're more a higher level communicator, and I think this is a skill people develop. I don't think it's a natural innate thing. If you have a high level of communication and whatnot, you don't need a contract to you don't need a written contract to guarantee everything. Especially if you've been playing for a long time. If you've been playing for 2 or 3 decades, you've got mental tools available to you that don't necessitate that sort of thing. But it's a fun thing to do. I've done it. It's fun to play around with, and it kind of makes things a little more quote unquote official, a little more real, so to speak. It enhances the fantasy for some people, I think.
Yes, thank you so much. And somebody is asking, I'm not sure if it's referring to the contract or the whole BDSM, like, should the environmental location be considered?
I think definitely. I mean, that's a question that could go on for a long time, and I'm running out of time too, so I'll answer this quickly. Um, at a play, I mean, if you want to really act out your BDSM role in a public play, in a public way, if part of your kink involves people seeing you that way, then play parties are a great space for that because everybody gets it, everybody understands. Like if you go to Walmart and you've got your sub on a leash and they're crawling behind you, you're going to get a few looks, you know? But at a play party, that's just normal. But I think like there's lots of but there's lots of ways to still have your kinks and live a regular day-to-day life. Like there are day collars that just look like a really pretty necklace. But they're actually a BDSM collar that a submissive can wear in public, and it's sort of like my dirty little secret kind of thing. There's lots of ways to incorporate your play and make it appropriate for the situation. Like if your master slave dynamic is a 24/7 thing and it's really important to you, a lot of people will wear a ring with a lock or a key on it, something like that. Just the way to sort of like have their dynamic and their safe feeling with them from where they go day to day.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christopher. Is there anything else would you like to still mention or point out?
No, I think that's everything for me. I think we covered a lot. That was really enjoyable. Thank you.
I think so, and to be honest, this is by far one of my favorite episodes that I have done or we did together. I think the topic is amazing. I think that, like, yeah, it just, the conversation went very fluid. So thank you so much for sharing. And I can see that, as you said, that you have got like decades of experience within this topic. So you are the right person for anyone to get familiar with this kind of like kink topic, as you mentioned.
Thank you. Right.
So I would say that the next live that hopefully in the future we are going to be doing, maybe like we could ask your partner if she can like join us, or like, yeah, we can come up like more with this polyamorous thing. So I'm gonna think it over and yeah, gonna let you know.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much, Christopher, one more time. I appreciate. I know that you are right now in the empire building phase in your life. I know that you
Mhm.
have got like a lot to do 24/7. You are on the go. So I really appreciate you have taken this 1 hour for me.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to doing it again in the future.
Yes, and I'm gonna post the video on YouTube. So just give me like a couple of hours, and yeah, I'm gonna share the link with you. Thank you so much,
Awesome.
and have a nice rest of your day. Yes,
Good luck,
lots of
Andrea.
success. Bye bye.